The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountainside as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her tactical gear one final time. The 28-year-old Navy SEAL had completed 17 successful missions in her 4-year career, but something felt different about this one. The intelligence reports were sketchy, the terrain was unfamiliar, and her usual team leader had been replaced at the last minute due to a training injury. Sarah's unit, SEAL Team 7, had been tasked with infiltrating a remote compound suspected of housing high-value targets linked to a recent terrorist attack on a military convoy. The mission briefing had been rushed, conducted in a dimly lit tent while mortars exploded in the distance. Captain Rodriguez, their new temporary leader, seemed nervous despite his decorated record. He kept checking his watch and avoided making eye contact with the team members. The helicopter insertion had gone smoothly enough. Sarah and her 5 teammates had rappelled into the valley under cover of darkness, their night vision goggles painting the world in eerie green hues. They moved through the rocky terrain with practiced silence, communicating only through hand signals and brief radio whispers. The compound lay 3 kilometers ahead, nestled between 2 steep ridges that formed a natural fortress. As they approached the target area, Sarah noticed inconsistencies in the landscape that didn't match their satellite imagery. The buildings seemed newer than expected, and there were fresh tire tracks leading away from the compound. Her instincts, honed through years of dangerous operations, began sending warning signals through her mind. She raised her hand to signal a halt, but Captain Rodriguez urged the team forward with aggressive hand gestures. The compound consisted of 3 main buildings surrounded by a low stone wall. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, perhaps 4 or 5 combatants at most. Sarah took point, leading her team toward the eastern entrance while Rodriguez and 2 others approached from the west. The plan called for simultaneous breach and clear operations, standard procedure for this type of mission. Sarah's team reached the perimeter wall without incident. She peered over the edge, scanning the courtyard for movement. Everything appeared quiet, almost too quiet for a facility that supposedly housed active terrorists. The buildings showed no signs of recent habitation, no cooking smoke, no weapons visible, no guards posted. Her unease grew stronger, but radio protocol prevented her from voicing concerns during the approach phase. The breach began at exactly 0347 hours. Sarah led her 2 teammates through the eastern entrance while Rodriguez's group entered from the opposite side. They moved through the first building methodically, clearing each room with textbook precision. The structure was completely empty, not just of people but of furniture, equipment, and any signs of recent use. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs stretched across doorframes. Moving to the second building, Sarah's team encountered the same strange emptiness. The intelligence reports had clearly been wrong, but the mission protocol required them to search all structures before declaring the area clear. Sarah's partner, Petty Officer Martinez, whispered into his radio that something wasn't right about the whole situation. The buildings felt like stage props rather than genuine terrorist hideouts. As they approached the third and largest building, Sarah heard a faint mechanical humming sound coming from underground. She motioned for her team to stop and listen. The sound was rhythmic, like machinery or generators running beneath their feet. According to their briefings, there were no underground facilities at this location. Sarah made the decision to investigate, despite not having specific orders to do so. The entrance to the underground area was concealed behind what appeared to be a storage room in the third building. Sarah discovered it when she noticed that one section of the floor sounded hollow under her boots. A closer examination revealed a hidden trapdoor secured with a modern electronic lock, completely out of place in what was supposed to be a primitive terrorist compound. Sarah radioed Captain Rodriguez to report the discovery, but received only static in response. She tried reaching the other team members, but their communications seemed to be blocked or jammed. The isolation made her extremely uncomfortable, but SEAL training emphasized adaptability and independent decision-making. She decided to proceed with the investigation while maintaining heightened alertness. Using specialized tools from her kit, Sarah managed to bypass the electronic lock within minutes. The trapdoor opened to reveal a metal staircase leading down into a well-lit corridor. The construction was clearly modern and sophisticated, with concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and what appeared to be ventilation systems. This was definitely not the work of local insurgents. Sarah descended the stairs with Martinez and their third teammate, Petty Officer Jackson, covering her from above. The underground facility extended much further than she had anticipated, with multiple corridors branching off in different directions. The humming sound grew louder as they moved deeper into the complex. Emergency lighting strips along the walls suggested this place was designed for extended occupation. The first corridor led to what appeared to be a communications center, complete with satellite uplinks and sophisticated computer equipment. Sarah recognized some of the technology as military-grade, the kind of equipment that required significant funding and expertise to acquire. She began photographing everything with her helmet-mounted camera, knowing that this intelligence would be crucial for understanding what they had stumbled into. Moving deeper into the facility, Sarah's team discovered sleeping quarters designed for at least 20 people, a fully equipped medical facility, and storage rooms containing weapons and ammunition. The scale and sophistication of the operation far exceeded anything mentioned in their mission briefings. Someone had invested serious resources in creating this underground base, and Sarah began to suspect that their intelligence had been deliberately misleading. As they explored the medical facility, Sarah noticed that some of the equipment was still warm, suggesting recent use. Fresh medical supplies were arranged on surgical tables, and monitors displayed recent patient data. Someone had been here very recently, possibly within the last few hours. The realization that they might not be alone in the facility sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Sarah attempted once again to radio Captain Rodriguez and the other team members, but continued to receive only static. The communication blackout was now clearly deliberate rather than accidental. Someone was jamming their frequencies, which meant someone knew they were there. Sarah made the tactical decision to abort the underground exploration and return to the surface immediately. As her team moved back toward the staircase, they heard footsteps echoing through the corridors behind them. Multiple sets of boots moving with military precision, not the irregular sounds of fleeing civilians. Sarah realized they were being pursued by trained personnel who knew the layout of the facility. She urged her teammates to move faster while maintaining noise discipline. Reaching the base of the staircase, Sarah sent Jackson up first while she and Martinez provided rear security. The footsteps were getting closer, and she could hear voices speaking in what sounded like heavily accented English. The pursuers were communicating in organized fashion, using tactical terminology that suggested military or paramilitary training. Sarah knew they had walked into a trap. Jackson's voice crackled through the short-range radio, reporting that the surface level was clear, but that he couldn't see Captain Rodriguez or the other team members anywhere. The courtyard appeared empty, and there were no signs of the other SEAL unit. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Either Rodriguez's team had been captured, eliminated, or they had never been allies to begin with. As Sarah and Martinez reached the top of the staircase, they could hear their pursuers climbing behind them. Sarah made the split-second decision to collapse the entrance, using a small explosive charge from her kit to bring down part of the ceiling and block the stairway. The explosion would alert anyone in the area to their location, but it would also buy them precious time to escape. The three SEALs moved quickly through the building and into the courtyard, scanning for threats while heading toward their planned extraction point. Sarah's training kicked in automatically, her mind calculating distances, cover positions, and escape routes while her body moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for situations like this countless times, though never under such confusing circumstances. As they cleared the compound's perimeter wall, Sarah spotted movement on the ridges surrounding the valley. Multiple figures were positioned at strategic points, effectively surrounding their position. The extraction helicopter wasn't scheduled to arrive for another 4 hours, and their current location was clearly compromised. Sarah realized that someone had planned this operation specifically to capture or eliminate her team. The three SEALs moved toward the rocky terrain that offered the best concealment, but the enemy had anticipated this move. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions, forcing them to take cover behind a cluster of large boulders. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different locations, suggesting a force much larger than anything mentioned in their intelligence reports. Martinez took a round in the shoulder during the initial exchange, though he remained combat effective. Jackson provided covering fire while Sarah assessed their tactical situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded in unfamiliar territory with no immediate prospect of reinforcement. The situation required desperate measures and creative thinking to survive. Sarah spotted a drainage channel that led away from their current position toward the next valley. It would provide concealment, but would also channel them toward an unknown destination. The alternative was to remain pinned down until their ammunition ran out or enemy reinforcements arrived. Sarah made the decision to use the drainage channel as an escape route, despite not knowing where it led. The three SEALs moved through the channel in single file, with Sarah taking point and Martinez bringing up the rear despite his wound. The channel was deeper than it appeared from above, providing good concealment from the surrounding ridges. They moved as quickly as possible while maintaining noise discipline, knowing that their pursuers would soon discover their escape route. After 20 minutes of movement through the drainage system, Sarah realized they were being herded rather than pursued. The enemy fire had been designed to drive them toward this specific escape route, which meant they were probably moving toward another trap. Her SEAL training emphasized thinking like the enemy, and she began to understand the sophisticated nature of the operation they had encountered. The drainage channel ended at a culvert that passed under what appeared to be an old road. Sarah could see daylight at the far end, but she also noticed that the area around the exit had been recently disturbed. Fresh earth and subtle signs of construction suggested that someone had been preparing this location for their arrival. The trap was becoming more obvious with each passing moment. Sarah made the difficult decision to exit the drainage system at an unexpected point, using explosives to blast through the sidewall rather than continuing to the prepared exit. The explosion would reveal their position, but it would also disrupt whatever ambush was waiting at the culvert's end. Sometimes the most unexpected action was the best tactical choice. The blast created a gap large enough for the three SEALs to escape into a small grove of trees. As they moved through the vegetation, Sarah could hear vehicles approaching on the road above. Their pursuers were mobilizing significant resources to capture them, which suggested that this operation was much larger than a simple terrorist compound raid. Someone had invested considerable planning and resources in this trap. Sarah's team reached the edge of the grove and found the village streets were quieter than Sarah had expected as darkness fell across the valley. She led Martinez and Jackson through the shadows between buildings, moving with the silent precision that had kept them alive through countless missions. The wound in Martinez's shoulder had stopped bleeding, but his movements were becoming increasingly stiff and painful. They needed medical attention and a secure place to rest, but every building they observed seemed to harbor potential threats. Sarah's first priority was establishing communication with their headquarters to report the mission's dramatic turn. Using hand signals, she directed Jackson to watch their rear while she examined a communications tower visible near the village center. The tower appeared to be civilian infrastructure, but Sarah had learned not to trust appearances in this strange valley where nothing was what it seemed. As they moved closer to the communications facility, Sarah noticed that the building housing the equipment was guarded by two men wearing civilian clothes but carrying military-grade weapons. Their positioning and alertness suggested professional training rather than local militia. Sarah began to understand that the entire village was likely a sophisticated operations center disguised as a rural community. The guards followed a predictable patrol pattern, which Sarah observed for 15 minutes before planning their approach. Her SEAL training had emphasized that the most effective intelligence gathering often required infiltration rather than confrontation. She decided to penetrate the communications facility to send a distress signal while avoiding direct engagement with the guards. Sarah left Martinez and Jackson concealed behind a cluster of storage buildings while she approached the communications tower alone. Moving through the shadows with practiced stealth, she reached the rear of the facility without detection. A ventilation grate provided access to the building's interior, and Sarah's compact frame allowed her to squeeze through the opening after removing several screws with her multi-tool. Inside the communications facility, Sarah discovered equipment far more sophisticated than anything a rural Afghan village would normally possess. Multiple satellite uplinks, encrypted radio systems, and computer terminals suggested this was a major intelligence hub rather than basic civilian infrastructure. Sarah began photographing the equipment while searching for a way to send an emergency transmission. Most of the radio systems required access codes that Sarah didn't possess, but she found an older emergency frequency transmitter that appeared to be a backup system. Working quickly and quietly, Sarah managed to establish a weak connection with what she hoped was a friendly military frequency. She transmitted a brief, coded message indicating her team's location and requesting immediate extraction. The response that came through the emergency channel shocked Sarah to her core. Instead of receiving acknowledgement from friendly forces, she heard a voice speaking in heavily accented English, informing her that her message had been received and that her location was now confirmed. The voice thanked her for making their job easier and warned her that resistance would only make things worse for her teammates. Sarah realized that all the communications equipment in the facility was controlled by hostile forces, and that her attempt to call for help had actually provided the enemy with precise information about her team's location. The sophisticated deception extended even to the emergency backup systems, suggesting a level of planning and resources that indicated state-level involvement rather than simple terrorist operations. Moving quickly through the facility, Sarah photographed as much equipment as possible before preparing to leave the same way she had entered. As she reached the ventilation grate, she heard vehicles approaching the building from multiple directions. The guards outside were speaking rapidly into radios, coordinating what appeared to be a major search operation centered on the communications facility. Sarah squeezed through the ventilation opening just as floodlights illuminated the area around the building. She had seconds to reach cover before the entire area would be swept by organized search teams. Rolling behind a nearby storage container, Sarah watched as dozens of armed personnel emerged from vehicles and began establishing a perimeter around the communications facility. The search teams moved with military precision, using night vision equipment and coordinated radio communications to systematically clear every building and potential hiding place in the immediate area. Sarah realized that Martinez and Jackson were directly in the path of the approaching searchers, and that she had perhaps 3 minutes to reach them before they were discovered. Sarah moved through the village using techniques learned in urban warfare training, staying below sight lines while moving between buildings with maximum speed and minimum exposure. The sound of approaching search teams grew louder behind her as she reached the storage buildings where she had left her teammates. Martinez and Jackson were exactly where she had positioned them, but the approaching enemy forces made their current location untenable. Jackson reported through whispered radio that he had counted at least 30 armed personnel establishing search patterns throughout the village. The enemy force was much larger than anything they could engage successfully, especially with Martinez's injury limiting their mobility. Sarah made the tactical decision to move her team out of the village immediately, even though this would expose them in open terrain. The three SEALs moved away from the village toward the rocky hills that dominated the landscape beyond the settlement. Their movement was hampered by Martinez's injury and by the need to avoid the search teams that were expanding their perimeter with each passing minute. Sarah could hear vehicles on the roads around the valley, coordinating to prevent any escape from the area. After an hour of careful movement through increasingly rugged terrain, Sarah's team reached a position overlooking the village from a rocky outcrop. From this vantage point, they could see the full scale of the operation that had been deployed against them. Vehicle-mounted searchlights swept the surrounding area, while teams of armed personnel moved through systematic search patterns. Sarah used her night vision scope to observe the coordination of the enemy forces, noting their professional equipment and disciplined movements. This was clearly not a hastily organized pursuit, but rather the execution of a carefully planned operation that had anticipated their every move. Someone had invested enormous resources in creating this elaborate trap, and Sarah began to suspect that she and her team were not random targets. Martinez's condition was deteriorating despite his attempts to maintain combat readiness. The shoulder wound was more serious than initially apparent, and he was beginning to show signs of significant blood loss. Sarah knew they needed medical attention and secure shelter within the next few hours, but every option seemed to lead deeper into enemy-controlled territory. Jackson spotted a cave system in the cliffs above their current position, offering the possibility of concealment while they planned their next move. The climb would be challenging, especially with Martinez's injury, but it would put them above the search teams and provide multiple escape routes if they were discovered. Sarah decided the risk was worth the potential advantages. The ascent to the cave system took 40 minutes, with Jackson and Sarah alternately supporting Martinez through the most difficult sections. The caves were deeper than they had appeared from below, extending far back into the mountainside and connecting to other chambers through narrow passages. Sarah posted Jackson as a lookout while she explored the cave system to ensure they weren't trapped in a dead end. The caves showed signs of previous use, with evidence of cooking fires and equipment storage suggesting that other people had used this location as a hideout. Sarah found cache supplies including medical equipment, which she immediately used to properly treat Martinez's wound. The medical supplies were military-grade and relatively fresh, indicating recent occupation by trained personnel. While Sarah worked on Martinez's shoulder, Jackson reported that the search teams below were beginning to expand their operations toward the cliff areas. Vehicle-mounted searchlights were scanning the rock faces, and climbing teams were being organized to check potential cave systems. Their current hiding place would not remain secure for much longer. Sarah explored deeper into the cave system, discovering that the passages extended much further into the mountain than she had expected. Some passages showed signs of artificial modification, with tool marks on the walls and cleared debris suggesting organized excavation work. Sarah began to suspect that these caves had been prepared as part of the same elaborate operation they had encountered at the compound. As she moved through the deeper passages, Sarah discovered a chamber that clearly served as a supply depot. Military equipment, communications gear, and provisions were stored in organized fashion, suggesting long-term planning and significant investment in establishing this facility. Sarah photographed everything while gathering supplies that might help her team survive and escape. In the supply chamber, Sarah found documents written in multiple languages, including English, Arabic, and what appeared to be Russian or Eastern European languages. The papers included maps of the region with marked positions and what appeared to be operational plans for activities throughout the valley. Sarah photographed the documents while trying to understand the scope of the operation they had stumbled into. One document that particularly caught the capture happened exactly as Sarah had predicted. The moment she stepped into view at the cave entrance with her hands raised, 6 armed men surrounded her with professional efficiency. They spoke in hushed tones using multiple languages, confirming her suspicions about the international nature of the operation. None of them seemed surprised by her surrender, suggesting that her psychological profile had accurately predicted this decision. Sarah was blindfolded and restrained with zip ties before being led down the mountainside to waiting vehicles. During the descent, she listened carefully to conversations around her, trying to gather intelligence about their destination and the scope of the operation. The men spoke with confidence about their success, mentioning time schedules and reporting procedures that suggested this capture was part of a larger coordinated effort. The vehicle journey lasted approximately 2 hours over rough terrain, during which Sarah was able to determine their general direction by sensing the vehicle's movements and listening to engine sounds. They were traveling deeper into the mountains rather than toward populated areas, which suggested that her destination was another remote facility rather than a traditional detention center. When the blindfold was finally removed, Sarah found herself in an underground complex far more sophisticated than anything she had encountered during the mission. The facility featured modern lighting, climate control, and professional security systems that indicated significant financial investment and technical expertise. This was clearly the headquarters of whatever organization had orchestrated the elaborate psychological experiment. Sarah was escorted through corridors lined with observation windows that looked into various chambers and laboratories. She glimpsed sophisticated computer equipment, medical facilities, and what appeared to be psychological testing areas. The scope of the operation was far larger than she had imagined, suggesting that she and her teammates were just one component of a much broader research program. The man who introduced himself as Director Volkov spoke perfect English despite his obvious Eastern European accent. He explained that Sarah had been selected for participation in an advanced study of elite military psychology and that her performance during the mission had exceeded their expectations. The elaborate scenario had been designed specifically to test the decision-making capabilities and loyalty responses of highly trained special operations personnel. Volkov revealed that the underground compound, the fake village, and even the cave system had all been constructed as components of a controlled testing environment. Every aspect of Sarah's mission had been monitored and recorded, from her initial infiltration to her final decision to surrender herself to save her teammates. The psychological manipulation had been far more comprehensive than she had realized. The most disturbing revelation was that dozens of similar experiments were being conducted simultaneously with military personnel from various nations. Sarah was shown video footage of other elite soldiers navigating comparable scenarios, each designed to test different aspects of training, loyalty, and psychological resilience. The research appeared to be focused on understanding how to predict and control the behavior of special operations forces. Sarah demanded information about Martinez and Jackson, but Volkov explained that their fate would depend on her cooperation with the research program. He showed her real-time tracking data indicating that her teammates had escaped through the cave system, but were being pursued by specialized hunting teams equipped with advanced technology. Their survival depended on how quickly they could reach friendly territory. The tracking device Martinez had given her was discovered during a thorough search, but not before Sarah had managed to activate it using a technique learned during survival training. The device was designed to look like a piece of standard equipment while actually transmitting location data to military satellites. If her teammates had escaped successfully, they would be able to track her location and potentially organize a rescue operation. Volkov outlined the research program in detail, explaining that Sarah's psychological profile and military background made her an ideal subject for testing the limits of SEAL training. The experiments were designed to determine how effectively traditional military loyalty and training could be overcome through controlled environmental manipulation and psychological pressure. Sarah realized that her capture was not the end of her ordeal, but rather the beginning of a new phase. The first test involved placing Sarah in a simulated interrogation environment designed to appear like a traditional enemy detention facility. Hidden cameras recorded her responses to various psychological pressure techniques, while sophisticated sensors monitored her physiological reactions. The researchers were particularly interested in how SEAL training prepared individuals to resist not just physical torture, but also advanced psychological manipulation. Sarah recognized many of the techniques from her resistance training, but the sophisticated technology and detailed psychological analysis made these tests far more challenging than anything she had experienced during military preparation. The researchers had access to detailed information about her background, relationships, and psychological vulnerabilities that allowed them to customize their approach for maximum effectiveness. Between testing sessions, Sarah was held in a comfortable cell equipped with monitoring equipment that tracked her sleep patterns, stress responses, and even subconscious reactions to various stimuli. She realized that every moment of her captivity was being analyzed to build a comprehensive understanding of how elite military personnel responded to extended psychological pressure. During her third day in captivity, Sarah overheard conversations between research staff that provided crucial intelligence about the scope of the operation. The facility was funded by a consortium of organizations interested in understanding how to counter special operations forces, including both foreign intelligence services and private military contractors. The research had potential applications for both defensive and offensive military operations. Sarah also learned that Martinez and Jackson had successfully evaded the hunting teams and reached a coalition military base, where they had reported the entire situation to military intelligence. Rescue operations were being planned, but the remote location and sophisticated defenses of the research facility made extraction extremely challenging. Sarah realized that she needed to find a way to contribute to her own rescue rather than simply waiting for outside help. The facility's security was designed to prevent escape by subjects who possessed advanced military training, but Sarah noticed that the researchers had underestimated certain aspects of SEAL capabilities. The monitoring systems were focused on obvious escape attempts rather than subtle intelligence gathering and preparation activities. Sarah began developing a plan that would use the facility's own sophisticated technology against its operators. Sarah's plan required her to appear compliant with the testing program while actually gathering intelligence about the facility's vulnerabilities and operational procedures. She began memorizing guard routines, security systems, and the layout of areas she was allowed to access during testing sessions. The psychological researchers were so focused on their experiments that they failed to notice her systematic intelligence collection. The breakthrough came during a test session when Sarah was able to access a computer terminal for a few seconds while researchers were distracted by equipment problems. She managed to download facility maps and security protocols onto a small data storage device concealed in her clothing. The information revealed that the underground complex had multiple emergency exits designed for evacuation during natural disasters or military attacks. Sarah also discovered that the facility's communication systems were connected to external networks during certain hours of the day, providing potential opportunities to contact outside assistance. The researchers maintained regular contact with their sponsors and government oversight agencies, creating windows of vulnerability when security protocols were temporarily relaxed for authorized communications. The most important piece of intelligence was the revelation that the facility was scheduled for a major security inspection by representatives from the funding organizations within the next week. During this inspection, security protocols would be modified to accommodate the visiting officials, creating potential opportunities for Sarah to either escape or signal for help. Sarah's opportunity came when a power system malfunction caused temporary failures in the monitoring equipment throughout the facility. During the 20-minute window while backup systems were being activated, Sarah was able to access the facility's emergency communication system and transmit her location and the intelligence she had gathered to military frequencies. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's transmission was received by a joint task force that had been searching for the facility since Martinez and Jackson's initial report. Within hours, satellite surveillance had confirmed the location, and rescue operations were being coordinated by multiple military units including SEAL Team 6, Army Special Forces, and international coalition partners. The rescue operation began with electronic warfare attacks that disabled the facility's communication systems and prevented the researchers from destroying evidence or eliminating subjects. Sarah felt the facility's power fluctuations and recognized the signature of military electronic countermeasures, indicating that rescue operations were in progress. When the assault began, Sarah was ready. Using intelligence gathered during her captivity, she was able to guide rescue forces through the facility's emergency exits while avoiding the main security systems. Her knowledge of the layout and security procedures proved crucial for the successful extraction of all research subjects and the capture of key personnel. The facility contained evidence of psychological warfare experiments involving military personnel from dozens of nations over several years. The research data revealed sophisticated techniques for predicting and manipulating the behavior of elite soldiers, information that had significant implications for international military security. Sarah's decision to gather intelligence during her captivity had prevented this research from being destroyed or relocated. Director Volkov and his senior staff were captured during the raid, along with extensive documentation about the psychological warfare program and its international funding sources. The investigation that followed revealed a complex network of organizations attempting to develop countermeasures against special operations forces, with implications reaching into several foreign intelligence services and private military contractors. Sarah's debriefing lasted several weeks, during which she provided detailed information about the psychological testing procedures and the facility's operations. Her experience became the foundation for new training programs designed to prepare special operations personnel for advanced psychological warfare techniques. The military also implemented new security protocols to prevent the kind of detailed psychological profiling that had made her team vulnerable to the initial deception. Martinez and Jackson both recovered fully from their injuries and returned to active duty with SEAL Team 7. The three teammates were awarded the Navy Cross for their actions during the mission, recognizing not only their individual heroism, but also their refusal to abandon each other despite overwhelming odds and sophisticated enemy manipulation. The psychological warfare research facility was destroyed, but Sarah knew that similar operations were likely being conducted elsewhere by organizations seeking to understand and counter special operations capabilities. Her experience had taught her that the most sophisticated threats to military personnel were not necessarily physical, but psychological, requiring new forms of training and preparation. During her recovery period, Sarah reflected on the mission that had tested every aspect of her SEAL training in ways that no exercise or previous combat experience had prepared her for. The enemy had attempted to use her own loyalty and training against her, but ultimately those same qualities had enabled her to survive, gather crucial intelligence, and contribute to the rescue of all captives. The investigation revealed that the mission had been compromised from the beginning, with false intelligence deliberately provided to ensure that Sarah's team would walk into the trap. Captain Rodriguez had indeed been a willing participant, recruited through blackmail and financial incentives to lead the team into the experimental scenario. His betrayal was particularly painful, but it reinforced the importance of the bonds between true teammates who had proven their loyalty through shared sacrifice. Sarah returned to active duty 6 months after her rescue, with new expertise in psychological warfare and advanced interrogation resistance techniques. She was assigned to train other special operations personnel in recognizing and countering sophisticated deception operations, helping to ensure that future missions would be better prepared for the kinds of threats she had encountered. The tracking device Martinez had given her was recovered and analyzed, revealing that it had successfully transmitted location data throughout her captivity. The device had been instrumental in enabling the rescue operation, demonstrating the importance of backup plans and redundant communication systems for special operations missions in hostile environments. Sarah's experience became a case study in military academies around the world, illustrating how psychological warfare techniques could be used against elite military personnel and how proper training and teamwork could overcome even sophisticated enemy deception. Her story emphasized that the most important weapons for special operations forces were not technological or tactical, but the bonds of trust and loyalty that enabled small teams to accomplish impossible missions. Years later, Sarah continued to serve with SEAL Team 7, participating in missions that drew on the lessons learned from her experience in the psychological warfare facility. She never again underestimated the importance of questioning intelligence, maintaining team cohesion, or preparing for threats that went beyond conventional military tactics. The motto that Navy SEALs always escape had proven true not because of superior training or equipment, but because of the refusal to abandon teammates and the determination to turn any situation, no matter how hopeless, into an opportunity for mission success. Sarah's attention appeared to be a psychological profile, complete with photographs and detailed personal information about herself and her SEAL teammates. The file included information about her training, previous missions, family background, and psychological assessments that should have been classified at the highest levels. Someone had accessed extremely sensitive military personnel records to prepare this operation. The psychological profile included predictions about her likely responses to various tactical situations, suggesting that the entire mission had been designed specifically to manipulate her team into this exact predicament. The document outlined a sophisticated psychological operation intended to test the limits of SEAL training and determine how effectively elite military personnel could be controlled through environmental manipulation. Sarah realized that she and her teammates were not just targets of opportunity, but rather test subjects in what appeared to be a large-scale experiment in psychological warfare and military deception. The elaborate underground facility, the fake village, and even their current cave hideout were all components of a controlled environment designed to study their responses to stress and deception. The most disturbing aspect of the documents was the suggestion that Captain Rodriguez had been a willing participant in the operation from the beginning, specifically chosen to lead the team into the trap because psychological analysis indicated that Sarah would be most likely to trust and follow his leadership. The betrayal went much deeper than simply compromised intelligence or enemy infiltration. As Sarah studied the documents, she heard Jackson's urgent whisper through the radio indicating that climbing teams were approaching the cave entrance. Multiple sets of lights were visible on the cliff face below, and the searchers appeared to be following a predetermined plan rather than conducting random exploration. Someone knew exactly where to look for them. Sarah gathered the most important documents and rejoined her teammates in the forward chamber. Martinez was stable but still weak, and Jackson reported counting at least 6 climbing teams approaching their position from different directions. The cave system that had seemed like salvation was actually another carefully prepared component of the trap they were trying to escape. The deeper passages offered potential escape routes, but Sarah now suspected that these two had been prepared with specific intentions. Every option seemed designed to channel them toward predetermined outcomes, making it impossible to determine which choices represented genuine opportunities and which led to additional traps. The psychological manipulation was far more sophisticated than anything she had encountered in her military training. Sarah made the decision to use the enemy's elaborate preparation against them by doing something completely unexpected. Instead of trying to escape through the cave system or defend their current position, she decided to surrender herself while sending Martinez and Jackson through the deepest passages with the captured documents. The psychological profile suggested that the enemy wanted her alive for further study, which might give her teammates the opportunity to escape and report their discoveries. Jackson immediately objected to the plan, citing SEAL protocols about never leaving teammates behind. Sarah explained that their situation was unlike anything covered by standard protocols, and that the intelligence they had gathered about the psychological warfare experiment was too important to risk losing. Someone needed to escape and report what they had discovered, even if it meant sacrificing her own freedom. Martinez, despite his injury, also refused to abandon Sarah. The 3 SEALs had trained together for over 2 years, and their trust in each other had been forged through dozens of dangerous missions. Sarah's plan violated everything they had been taught about loyalty and mutual support, but she argued that their current situation required thinking beyond conventional military doctrine. The approaching search teams were now close enough that Sarah could hear individual voices echoing through the cave system. Multiple languages were being spoken, confirming her suspicion that this was an international operation rather than local insurgent activity. The psychological warfare experiment appeared to involve cooperation between several different organizations or nations. As the voices grew closer, Sarah made her final decision. She would create a diversion by revealing herself to the search teams while Martinez and Jackson escaped through the deepest passages carrying the captured intelligence. If her analysis of the psychological profiles was correct, the enemy would be too focused on capturing her to pursue her teammates effectively. Sarah hugged both her teammates goodbye, knowing that she might never see them again. Martinez pressed a small tracking device into her hand, explaining that it was a prototype emergency beacon that could transmit her location even through underground interference. Jackson promised that they would return with reinforcements no matter how long it took or what resources were required. As Sarah prepared to surrender herself to save her teammates, she reflected on the SEAL motto that had guided her through 4 years of dangerous missions. The enemy might have created an elaborate psychological experiment designed to test the limits of military training and loyalty, but they had underestimated the one thing that couldn't be controlled or predicted through psychological analysis: the unbreakable bonds forged between warriors who had faced death together and chosen to trust each other completely. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped toward the cave entrance, knowing that the real test of her SEAL training was just beginning. The sophisticated enemy who had orchestrated this elaborate deception was about to discover that Navy SEALs possessed qualities that couldn't be measured by psychological profiles or controlled by environmental manipulation. The most important battle was yet to be fought, and it would be decided not by superior equipment or tactical advantage, but by the simple refusal to surrender the values that made them SEALs. Levies overlooking a small village nestled in the next valley. The settlement appeared peaceful, with smoke rising from cooking fires and children playing in the streets. Sarah knew that approaching civilian areas during combat operations required extreme caution, but they desperately needed to break contact with their pursuers and find a way to communicate with their headquarters. As they observed the village, Sarah noticed several details that seemed inconsistent with a typical Afghan rural community. The vehicles parked near the buildings were too new and well-maintained, the satellite dishes were more sophisticated than usual, and the residents moved with a purposefulness that suggested military training. Sarah began to suspect that the entire valley was part of the elaborate trap they had encountered. Martinez's wound was beginning to affect his mobility, and Jackson was running low on ammunition after the earlier firefight. Sarah knew they needed to find shelter and medical supplies quickly, but every option seemed to lead deeper into enemy territory. Her SEAL training emphasized that sometimes the best way out of a trap was to move further into it, using the enemy's expectations against them. Sarah made the decision to approach the village, but not as fleeing soldiers seeking help. Instead, they would move as a reconnaissance team gathering intelligence on enemy operations. This change in mindset would alter their behavior and potentially allow them to blend in while searching for escape opportunities. Sometimes the best hiding place was in plain sight. As the three SEALs prepared to descend toward the village, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that everything about their mission had been orchestrated from the beginning. The faulty intelligence, the last-minute change in leadership, the sophisticated underground facility, and now this apparent civilian village that felt like a movie set. Someone had invested enormous resources in creating this elaborate scenario. The question that haunted Sarah as they moved down the hillside was whether Captain Rodriguez had been part of the deception from the beginning, or if he and his team had also fallen victim to the same trap. Either way, Sarah knew that their survival depended on her ability to think beyond conventional tactical responses and find a way to turn the enemy's elaborate plan against them. The sun was beginning to set as Sarah led her wounded teammates toward what might be their final mission objective, though none of them yet understood what that objective really was or who had designed it. The day that had started as a routine counterterrorism operation had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than anything they had encountered in their SEAL careers. Sarah's mind raced through everything she knew about unconventional warfare, psychological operations, and survival techniques as they approached the mysterious village. She had no way of knowing that the real test of her SEAL training was just beginning, or that the events of the next few hours would challenge everything she believed about loyalty, survival, and the true meaning of never leaving a teammate behind.